Imagine the scene at Incheon International Airport. A chartered flight is on the tarmac, just arrived from Cambodia. In the terminal, there's this palpable, anxious energy. Families are waiting, clutching signs, bracing themselves. They've heard the stories, nightmare reports of their loved ones lured to Southeast Asia, kidnapped, and forced to work in massive, brutal scam operations. They're expecting victims. They're waiting for a rescue. The plane doors finally open. The passengers, 64 of them, begin to file out onto the tarmac. But this isn't the reunion they were braced for. There are no tearful embraces. Instead, the passengers are met by a line of police officers, and as they step onto home soil one by one, they are immediately arrested. The victims are now criminal suspects. That single moment, that flip from rescue to detain, perfectly captures the horrifying ambiguity of what's happening. When Korean National Security Advisor went to investigate, he came back with a chilling assessment. The people trapped inside include both voluntary and involuntary participants. It leaves you with an impossible question. How do you tell the difference? When someone is trapped in a system notorious for torture and abuse, at what point does a victim become a perpetrator?
Yeah, that opening it perfectly frames the terrifying reality we're going to unpack today, doesn't it? We're looking at this awful, awful intersection of large-scale human trafficking and really sophisticated, cyber-enabled financial fraud. And it's all centered in these scam compounds in Southeast Asia.
Exactly. That anecdote, it lays bare the just impossible moral dilemma at the heart of this whole global crisis. So our mission today is really to unpack these transnational criminal networks driving it all, the psychological tricks they use, and maybe most crucially, the sort of complex socioeconomic factors that even create this vulnerability in the first place. We're going to guide you through some recent, really major international investigations, enforcement actions that have finally started putting names and faces to the masterminds running these huge operations.
And to really grasp the complexity, we have to start with the sheer scale of the human tragedy. I mean, the numbers here are, frankly, they're staggering. Sure. The UN Human Rights Office, they estimated that in 2023 alone, something like 120,000 people in Cambodia. Yeah. And another 100,000 in Myanmar were essentially coerced into participating in these scam operations.
Wow. So that's 220,000 people, coerced individuals. That's like the population of a decent-sized city, all trapped and forced into being criminals. How are they even getting there?
Well, predominantly they're foreign nationals. They're lured in by these incredibly convincing fake job postings you see online. They target people looking for better wages, advertising roles that sound legitimate, like customer service representative, translator, maybe digital marketing specialist.
Right, the kind of jobs people actually look for internationally.
Exactly. They promise high salaries. They often cover airfare, provide accommodation. So victims think they've landed this great, legitimate, maybe lucrative international job, maybe something to help their families back home.
Yeah.
But the moment they arrive, that's when it flips. They're seized, effectively trafficked into these notorious compounds.
And once they're inside, the reports we've seen about the reality of these compounds, it sounds less like an office and more like, medieval detention centers.
That's probably the most fitting description, honestly. These aren't offices at all. They're prison-like facilities. You often see descriptions of high walls topped with barbed wire, guarded by armed personnel. Once you're inside, the workers are just detained, immediately put into forced labor, compelled to defraud other people online.
And the hours.
The work shifts are brutal. We're talking 12 to 20 hours a day, often 6 days a week.
20 hours a day, that's just inhuman.
It is. And this environment, it's maintained through constant threat and violence. There's documentation of really rigorous enforcement of work quotas. If a worker doesn't meet their daily scamming target, the punishments are swift and severe. We're talking beatings, electrocution, being deprived of food, huge salary deductions for even tiny infractions. The whole system is basically designed to break them, physically and psychologically, just to ensure compliance.
Which brings us right back to that scene at Incheon, with the South Korean citizens being arrested. It sounds like the criminal organization isn't just incidentally involved in trafficking. They're using human trafficking as the core way to build their workforce.
Precisely. That's the key insight. For the vast majority of people trapped in there, they're committing crimes under extreme duress, under the constant threat of really serious physical harm to themselves, or, and this is critical harm to their families back home if they resist or don't cooperate. So that line, that boundary between being a victim of trafficking and being a perpetrator of fraud, It just completely collapses in that kind of scenario.
But the ambiguity, it seems deliberately engineered to be sticky, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
even if someone tries to escape, they end up becoming complicit in a different way.
Yes, and that's perhaps one of the most insidious parts of the whole business model. Workers who try to leave are often extorted. They're required to pay these enormous release fees, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars.
Which they obviously don't have.
Exactly. So if they can't pay, they're often required to find a replacement worker, someone to take their place. So by coercing the worker to recruit, maybe a friend, a former colleague, maybe even a stranger online, the organization forces them to become active participants in the trafficking cycle itself. It ensures this continuous supply of new victims flows into the compounds.
That's just horrifying, turning the victim into the recruiter. But we should circle back to what that national security advisor said, that some people were voluntary participants. Does that mean, is there a small group who actually chooses to stay?
It's a really important point. While the overwhelming majority are trafficked and coerced, there does seem to be evidence of a small population who maybe once they realize the sheer amount of money flowing through the scheme might choose to stay, perhaps hoping to make a quick profit, out-scam the system somehow, or just cash out quickly. It's a small minority, but...
But they exist, and their presence helps the criminals muddy the waters.
Exactly. It enables the TCOs, the transnational criminal organizations, to push this narrative that everyone there is choosing to participate. And that complicates law enforcement efforts, rescue operations.
Yeah.
It makes everything much, much harder.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to where these operations are actually thriving. We're seeing these scam centers popping up across Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines, often concentrated in border regions or these special economic zones with very little government oversight, right?
That's right. And there's a really fascinating and frankly deeply disturbing geographic pattern emerging here too.
You mean how the migration flow is sort of flipped on its head?
Precisely. You're touching on this inversion of the traditional labor migration flow. Historically, you see people moving from economically distressed areas to wealthier areas for work. But here we see recruits coming from both poorer and wealthier countries, places like South Korea, China, even Western nations, traveling to countries often cited as among the poorest in the ASEAN bloc, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar.
That's so counterintuitive, isn't it? It really tells you something. It's not just about pure economic desperation anymore. It seems tied to the digital demand. Why would a qualified engineer from a wealthy country travel to some known unregulated zone in Cambodia for what looks like a basic customer service job?
Because the nature of the crime itself has evolved so dramatically. These organizations don't just need low-skilled labor anymore. They need highly educated, digitally native personnel. The research really emphasizes that the recruits often possess higher education-specific technical experience. They're targeting people who can run sophisticated, often multilingual digital operations. They need people who understand cryptocurrency, finance, social engineering.
So the bottleneck isn't cheap labor. The bottleneck is competent labor capable of running these advanced scams that target wealthy individuals, often in Western markets.
It's exactly right. It represents a fundamental shift in the whole infrastructure of human trafficking, and it's being dictated by the needs of the digital criminal economy. And the complex scams these highly skilled but coerced workers are forced to run. Well, one particularly notorious type has a specific chilling name, Shazupan.
Ah, yes. The pig butchering scheme. Okay, let's really delve deep into the anatomy of this operation because it's just a terrifying lesson in psychological warfare disguised as investment fraud. The name itself is brutal. You fatten the pig, the victim, with trust and fake profits, and then you slaughter them by stealing everything.
It really is the ultimate long con. And it starts, crucially, with initial contact that has to appear completely harmless, maybe even accidental. Think about getting an errant text message, an SMS or a message on a dating app, or maybe a seemingly random connection request on social media. The classic example often cited is something like, "Hey Dave, when's that meeting scheduled for again?"
Right. And the victim, probably confused, replies, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong number."
And boom, the scammer immediately flips it. "Oh, I'm so sorry, my mistake. Must have hit a wrong digit. But hey, since I have you, how's your day going?" That casual, apologetic opening instantly disarms the victim. It creates this little sense of shared, innocuous connection. It feels harmless.
And that's just the very beginning of the relationship building phase. This can go on for sometimes even months, right? Consuming the scammer's entire focus. And we have to keep remembering that scammer is likely a trafficked worker operating under immense pressure and threat.
Absolutely. The scammer, using a carefully crafted fake persona, often very attractive, very successful, invests heavily in social engineering. They might feign romantic interest or mirror shared hobbies they glean from the victim's profile, or maybe flaunt an impossibly lavish lifestyle online, showing off fancy cars, exotic vacations. They use these tested psychological scripts that are designed not just to gain trust, but to build deep emotional intimacy. The goal is to make the victim feel seen, understood, emotionally connected, really creating a dependency.
So they're preying on fundamental emotional vulnerabilities, maybe loneliness, the desire for a relationship, or perhaps just the desperate need for some kind of economic stability. They're essentially creating a context where the target wants to trust the scammer, needs to believe it's real.
And critically, the scammer never, ever asks for money directly in that initial phase. That would be too obvious. Instead, once that deep trust is established, they'll sort of casually introduce this secret, exclusive, fraudulent crypto trading platform. They present it as a guaranteed path to wealth. Maybe it's gold trading or an exclusive foreign exchange thing, promising these extraordinary returns. Sometimes they even show fabricated profits appearing within minutes of the first small test trade.
So they position themselves not as someone asking for help, but as a benefactor, someone offering a secret key to success.
That's the genius of it, psychologically. They guide the victim, step by step, through the process of converting real money into cryptocurrency, using legitimate known services like Coinbase or even a Bitcoin ATM, and then transferring that crypto onto the fraudulent platform that the scammers control. And the reports confirm these platforms are incredibly elaborate fakes. They mirror professional trading interfaces complete with real-time charts, transaction histories. It all looks completely real.
But the balances are fake.
Exactly. As one source put it, they're just fake numbers on a screen.
Yeah.
The victim is essentially trading air, thinking they're making huge profits.
And to make the illusion even more powerful, I understand the scammers will sometimes actually allow a small withdrawal early on. The victim puts in a bit, makes a profit, takes it out.
Yes. That's the ultimate hook. It seals the deal, it triggers confirmation bias, makes the victim feel smart, secure, convinced the system is totally legitimate. Once that confidence is locked in, the slaughter phase begins. The scammer pushes some kind of massive, urgent, time-limited investment opportunity, a limited window to double your profits.
Yeah.
Encouraging the target to leverage absolutely everything. Empty their retirement accounts, take out loans, maybe even mortgage their home.
And once that final huge sum is transferred, poof, the platform freezes, the balance disappears, and the scammer, the person the victim believed was their friend, their potential partner, their trusted financial advisor, just vanishes. Gone without a trace.
The manipulation is incredibly sophisticated, rooted in leveraging these deep-seated emotional and cognitive biases.
Yeah.
You just talk about prospect theory, for example, which seems heavily exploited here. This theory suggests that people behave irrationally when faced with potential loss compared to potential gain.
How does that play out here? Like, if the victim has already put in, say, $50,000 and the fake platform shows they've made another $100,000 in fake profit, they become more afraid of losing that perceived $100,000 gain than they are of risking more actual principal.
Precisely. That fear of losing the perceived gain, even though it's entirely fabricated, is incredibly powerful. It's why victims end up emptying their life savings chasing these phantom profits. They also heavily use authority bias, maybe impersonating police, government officials, or utility services, especially during a supposed recovery phase, to keep the victim quiet or maybe even to steal more money by offering fake help. They are absolute masters of emotional exploitation.
The global financial impact of all this, it's just staggering. These aren't small amounts of money we're talking about.
Not at all. Cryptocurrency investment fraud alone was reportedly responsible for over $5.8 billion in reported losses just in 2024. And if you broaden that out to look at total reported consumer losses to all types of online fraud in the U.S., that figure climbed towards $12.5 billion in 2024. This isn't petty crime. It's a major economic engine run by these huge transnational organizations.
Okay, so once they've stolen literally billions of dollars in crypto, these criminals face a massive challenge. How do they turn that virtual, often traceable currency into usable, untraceable wealth? What kind of specific laundering techniques are these TCOs actually using?
Well, they employ some highly sophisticated methods to obscure the origins of the funds. One primary technique is often called spraying and funneling cryptocurrency. So imagine a huge inflow of stolen funds, let's say 1,000 Bitcoin, coming into a single digital address. They immediately spray that volume, breaking it down and sending it out across scores, maybe hundreds of different virtual currency addresses in small, seemingly random amounts.
Like shaking pepper across a huge table, making it hard to track any single grain.
Exactly. Then, through a complex, often automated process, they quickly funnel those tiny amounts from all those addresses back together into fewer, cleaner addresses. This whole process obscures the original source and makes tracing the path incredibly difficult, almost impossible for law enforcement without specialized tools and expertise. It requires significant technical knowledge and infrastructure.
And beyond the purely crypto techniques, the information suggests they're also exploiting weaknesses in the broader global financial system itself.
Absolutely. They actively look for what's called jurisdictional arbitrage, basically, finding places where the rules are weakest or enforcement is lax. Specifically, they exploit remote account opening practices in jurisdictions that might have less stringent Know Your Customer or KYC rules. For instance, some financial institutions might allow someone to open an account based merely on sending a digital image of a foreign ID document and maybe a quick selfie check.
So, if major hubs like Singapore or China, which have faced massive domestic scam problems, tighten their controls significantly, the criminals just pivot. They shift their focus to jurisdictions, maybe like the US in some cases, where remote verification for foreign clients might be less rigorous.
That's the very definition of jurisdictional arbitrage. And these TCOs, these transnational criminal organizations, they don't abandon the old ways either. They still use traditional methods. Leveraging money mules, often unsuspecting individuals recruited online with promises of easy cash to physically move funds or make withdrawals. And they engage in massive bulk cash smuggling operations to get physical dollars out of source countries.
And what's really terrifying is that these billions in stolen funds don't just sit in a vault somewhere. They're actively used to fuel more criminal activity, including things that pose serious national security threats.
Precisely. The evidence confirms that these proceeds are used to finance a whole range of illicit activities, everything from helping rogue states or entities evade international sanctions to funding sophisticated ransomware operations. We've seen direct connections, for instance, between some of the financial pipelines used by these scam compounds and major cyber heists that have been linked to state actors like the DPRK. This is where organized crime converges directly with state-level threats.
Okay, the sheer scale of this problem eventually demanded law enforcement zero in on a specific target. And that brings us to the structure of the criminal empire itself, allegedly led by a man named Chen Zi. He's a 37-year-old Cambodian national, the founder of the Prince Holding Group, or Prince Group.
Right. On the surface, Prince Group presented itself as this huge, legitimate, multinational corporate conglomerate, a seemingly powerful entity focused on real estate, finance, consumer services, supposedly operating in over 30 countries. But the recent U.S. indictment completely tears down that facade, exposing the alleged criminal core.
Chen Zi himself is charged with wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy. The allegation is that he was personally directing the Prince Group's operation of these forced labor scam compounds. He wasn't just some passive investor. He was allegedly the central mastermind pulling the strings.
Yeah, the indictment paints a picture of him building the Prince Group into one of Asia's largest transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs. What's truly shocking, I think, is the level of personal, hands-on managerial detail that's revealed in the charging documents. Chen Zi was allegedly directly involved in managing the day-to-day of the scam compounds, even maintaining detailed ledgers that meticulously track the profits being generated.
And he supposedly possessed documents that actually described and even depicted the infrastructure of the crime. Things like phone farms, these automated call centers using thousands of phones, presumably to initiate the social engineering phase of the scams at scale.
And the evidence points towards direct involvement in the brutality that underlies the whole operation. The sources indicate he allegedly possessed images showing violent methods used on workers and even communicated directly with his subordinates about punishing individuals who caused trouble, and the specific instruction he allegedly provided, that they should not be beaten to death.
Wait, if you're giving a direct command to not kill the workers, that heavily implies that killing them was either a known risk, a possibility, or maybe even a frequent enough occurrence that it needed managing. That single detail speaks volumes about the level of calculated violence and control coming from the very top.
It really underscores the chilling calculus of the operation, doesn't it? Abuse them just enough to maintain absolute control and extract maximum profit, but try not to damage the asset so much that the labor supply is completely disrupted. Furthermore, Chen Zi apparently wielded significant political influence within Cambodia. He was granted an honorary title, something like a duke, and even served as an advisor to both Cambodia's former and current prime ministers.
That kind of political protection is absolutely vital for an operation like this because it strongly suggests the group was likely paying bribes to public officials, specifically to avoid any meaningful law enforcement disruption. If local authorities are compromised or looking the other way, a domestic investigation becomes essentially impossible.
Which is precisely why the response really had to be a major, coordinated international intervention. And the U.S. Department of Justice took what can only be described as a historic step. They filed a civil forfeiture complaint against approximately 127,271 Bitcoin linked to Chen Zhe.
127,000 Bitcoin. At the time the action was taken, that cryptocurrency was valued at roughly $15 billion, with a B.
It is officially the largest single forfeiture action in the entire history of the Department of Justice. It's just a staggering victory against organized crime on this scale. It really highlights the sheer, almost unimaginable scale of the wealth these TCOs had managed to accumulate and store virtually.
And critically, this wasn't just a unilateral U.S. action acting alone, was it?
No, not at all. It was designed as a systemic takedown. The U.S. and the U.K. announced complementary actions, formally designating the Prince Group as a transnational criminal organization. OFAC, that's the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, the agency that enforces sanctions, came down really hard. They sanctioned 146 related targets, including 117 shell companies. Many of these companies, the designation noted, had no apparent real commercial or business activity. They were just paper entities, purely designed to move and hide illicit money.
And the financial enforcement side, FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, they also took significant action against a really critical piece of the money laundering machinery.
They did indeed. FinCEN finalized a special rule under Section 311 of the Patriot Act to effectively sever a Cambodia-based entity called the Hyoni Group from the U.S. financial system. That essentially cuts off its access to the global dollar market, which is a death blow for any entity involved in international finance. Hyoni Group was identified as a massive money laundering hub, reportedly having laundered at least $4 billion in illicit proceeds.
And that $4 billion, it wasn't just Prince Group money flowing through Hyoni, was it?
That's another crucial detail that emerged. It was a convergence point. Yes, funds came from the Prince Group TCO, but also from various other virtual currency investment scams, and significantly also from cyber heists that have been linked directly to the DPRK. It really highlights how these sophisticated criminal infrastructures are often shared and interdependent, posing these complex, layered threats to global financial stability and security.
So after successfully laundering these billions through all these complex corporate structures and financial entities, what exactly did Chen Zhe and his alleged co-conspirators spend the money on?
Well, predictably, they lived extravagantly. They used the illicit funds to acquire all the expected trappings of immense wealth: high-end watches, yachts, private jets, luxurious vacation homes around the world. But the reports also highlight the extent they went to in order to clean the money's image, including purchasing extremely high-value, rare artwork. For instance, a Picasso painting was specifically mentioned, acquired through a major auction house in New York City.
Right. Buying a world-class, famous painting is perhaps the ultimate status symbol for clean wealth. It effectively turns stolen, laundered crypto into a universally recognized, easily transferable physical asset with provenance.
And even their supposedly legal businesses were allegedly founded on fraud. They apparently used the stolen funds to finance operations like large-scale cryptocurrency mining. Chen Zhe reportedly even boasted in communications that for these mining operations, the profit is considerable because there is no cost. Of course, there's no cost. The initial capital to set up the entire mining operation was literally stolen money siphoned from countless victims.
Let's try to give our listener one very concrete, specific example of the kind of compounds operating under this vast Prince Group umbrella. The Jinbei Group was mentioned.
Yes, the Jinbei Group was apparently one of the most notorious compounds operating under the Prince Group's control, often disguised outwardly as a luxury hotel and casino company. But this specific entity, Jinbei, is linked in reports not just to the usual extortion and forced labor, but also specifically to the gruesome murder of a 25-year-old Chinese national back in 2023. This is the horrific human cost of this criminal enterprise laid bare. Law enforcement investigations managed to identify that just a single TCO network associated with Jinbei was responsible for at least $18 million in reported losses for just 259 victims located in the U.S. alone.
Okay, when we hear about these massive takedowns, the $15 billion seizure, the indictment of alleged masterminds like Chen Zhe, it feels like progress, maybe like we're winning the fight. But then you look at the other data, the numbers showing consumer losses from these scams are still soaring globally. That really suggests that law enforcement, even with these huge wins, is mostly reacting to the symptom, not addressing the root cause. We probably need to look more critically at the underlying structural drivers that create this widespread vulnerability in the first place.
Absolutely. That's the crucial next step in understanding this. The foundational cause in many ways is widespread economic distress. This was particularly exacerbated by the uneven global recovery following the COVID-19 pandemic. Many developing countries have faced and continue to face high inflation, rising living costs, and chronically weak investment. This leaves massive populations feeling economically insecure and desperate for opportunity.
And this economic stress feeds directly into a huge problem: youth unemployment. The global youth unemployment rate officially hit 13% in 2023, but in many of the specific regions targeted by these criminal recruiters, it's far, far higher than that. So when young, often educated people cannot find stable, formal sector employment, a fraudulent online promise of a high-salary international tech job, well, it becomes incredibly tempting, almost irresistible.
It creates the absolute perfect target profile for the recruiters. Individuals who possess the necessary digital skills to actually run the scams effectively, but lack the economic safety net or legitimate local opportunities to withstand the allure of the high-risk, high-reward, or so it seems, offer. And this core problem is then compounded by other external factors, like, for example, the withdrawal of international support systems in certain areas.
You're talking about things like cuts in foreign assistance programs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
One stark example cited is the impact of U.S. foreign assistance cuts to refugee camps located along the Thai-Myanmar border. We're talking about places like Maigila Camp, Umpiam Mai Camp. Combined, they're home to over 44,000 displaced people, refugees. And these camps are located perilously close to some of the most notorious crime hubs in the region, like the Chuikoko complex in Myanmar.
So when essential aid disappears, refugees who are already an incredibly vulnerable population by definition are left with virtually zero alternatives for basic survival. That level of desperation makes them prime targets for recruitment by these transnational crime syndicates operating just miles away, promising any kind of income.
It's a direct structural driver. It pushes people who have already lost everything straight into the arms of the traffickers. So you have this confluence: economic stress combined with our increasing digital dependency, which was massively accelerated by the pandemic, shifting work, finance, education online, and then you amplify that by cutting social safety nets. It creates a perfect storm for exploitation.
And the technology itself isn't just enabling the crime, it's actively amplifying it now. Things like generative AI are becoming the new powerful tool in the scammer's arsenal.
That's absolutely correct. AI helps these scam operations create extremely convincing fake digital experiences. Everything from fake job portals that look identical to legitimate sites like LinkedIn, to fraudulent banking interfaces that are flawless, even generating high-quality, emotionally resonant, personalized scripts for the pig butchering grooming process. This makes the scams much harder for the average person to spot, and it dramatically increases the speed and sheer volume at which these criminal operations can function.
And the result is just this explosion of cyber-enabled crime, even in countries we think of as being very digitally savvy. Thailand apparently saw a 112% surge in reported scam calls and SMS messages in 2024. And Singapore, despite being globally recognized for its digital literacy initiatives, lost a record $1.1 billion to online scams in that same year.
So, despite some unprecedented international cooperation efforts, we've seen joint China-Cambodia operations, Thailand-China joint task forces, new laws being passed like Singapore's Online Criminal Harms Act or the UK's Online Safety Act. The current enforcement landscape remains heavily reactive and, frankly, uneven in its effectiveness.
Why are these measures failing to keep pace? I mean, we're seizing billions in assets, indicting leaders. Why is the supply chain of victims, the human trafficking element, still flowing so strongly?
Well, the challenges are pretty fundamental. You have fragmented law enforcement capacity, especially in complex, often conflict-ridden states like Myanmar, where central authority is weak or non-existent in border areas. There's often a significant lack of technical expertise within many police forces or regulatory agencies required to handle sophisticated crypto tracing and analysis. And critically, there's a serious lack of effective, fast-acting cross-border legal instruments like mutual legal assistance treaties that can quickly and effectively address that jurisdictional arbitrage problem when the money, the data, and the criminals themselves are constantly moving across borders.
So, the argument emerging from all this is that if we only focus on investigation and prosecution after the crime has already happened, we're essentially destined to keep losing this battle. We need to shift towards a much more proactive strategy, one that directly addresses the root drivers of vulnerability.
That really is the core finding, the main takeaway. The path forward has to be a more holistic, genuinely people-centric strategy, and it has to be rooted in structural reform. Governments, both individually and collectively, must prioritize creating stable, legitimate employment opportunities, especially for young people in vulnerable regions. And equally importantly, they need to establish robust social safety nets. Things like unemployment benefits, housing subsidies, food security programs, anything that can help buffer the severe economic shocks that make these fraudulent job offers seem like the only viable option.
And on the user side, the defense has to be built on more than just basic technical literacy. It needs to be about genuine digital resilience.
Absolutely. Public education efforts have to evolve significantly. It's simply not enough anymore to teach people how to use a computer or navigate the internet. We need to be teaching digital skepticism, critical thinking skills applied to the online world. We need to normalize the understanding that falling for a sophisticated scam is usually the result of targeted emotional and psychological manipulation, not necessarily digital incompetence or foolishness. The goal has to be teaching people ingrained habits to pause, to question, and crucially, to verify independently before making high-stakes decisions or sharing sensitive information online.
And finally, at the international level, the governance structures themselves need a serious upgrade to even begin to keep pace with these highly adaptive digital criminals.
Yeah, existing frameworks, like for example the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, were simply not designed with today's digital realities in mind. They don't adequately address things like online recruitment tactics, virtual coercion that happens entirely remotely, or the complex digital financial transactions involved in laundering the proceeds. These frameworks must be updated to specifically incorporate these digital components. And we absolutely have to find ways to eliminate that jurisdictional arbitrage, perhaps by encouraging more consistent and comprehensive anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, AML-CFT, supervisory regimes globally, particularly when it comes to regulating virtual asset service providers, or VASPs. Those are the crypto exchanges, the wallet providers, that often serve as the initial on-ramps and off-ramps for these stolen funds.
So we've spent this time peeling back the layers of what is truly a complex, horrifying global crisis, one where massive financial exploitation and profound human suffering are deeply mutually reliant. What we're really witnessing here isn't just generalized cybercrime. It is a fully fledged transnational industry built on coerced labor, industrialized digital fraud, and the ruthless exploitation of both economic desperation and our most basic intrinsic human trust. The historic actions taken against figures like Chen Zi and the Prince Group, seizing those billions of dollars, they underscore a critical point. These organizations are operating at a scale and sophistication comparable to nation states, and dismantling them for good will require nothing less than a sustained whole-of-nation approach domestically, combined with deeply coordinated, persistent international cooperation.